Imagine a prophet who saw a future so terrifying, he pretty much spent his entire life in tears. He saw his city burn to the ground, his people dragged into exile, and he felt this eternal silence from God. But through all of that, he was guarding a secret, a hidden promise that somehow made all that suffering worth it. This is the story of the weeping prophet's secret.
Wow. That's the cry of a man who has hit rock bottom. It's really not the kind of thing you expect to hear from a prophet, right? This raw, unfiltered despair. Well, that's our starting point. This is our window into the immense suffering of a man named Jeremiah.
So how do you get a title like that? Well, it was earned through years of just relentless opposition and deep personal pain. But his story is so much more than just sorrow. He was a messenger with a basically impossible task. And those tears, they were shed for a very specific reason.
And that's the real mystery we're going to unpack here. There was this revelation, this hidden truth, that only really came to light in his absolute darkest moment. And you know what? It would end up changing the relationship between humanity and God forever.
Okay, so who was this guy, Jeremiah, before this crushing weight was dropped on his shoulders? He wasn't a king, he wasn't a soldier. His life was supposed to be much quieter before it was totally interrupted by a divine command.
Picture this. He was just a kid, really, from a small town, growing up in a priestly family. He probably expected a simple life, helping his dad out with religious duties. But then one day, this voice comes from everywhere and nowhere all at once, and his ordinary life just ended. Forever. And his reaction? It was pure, completely understandable fear. "I'm just a boy," he says. "I don't even know how to speak to people." But God's promise wasn't about Jeremiah's ability. It was about God's presence. He was told he was chosen to uproot and tear down, but also to build and to plant. His mission was this wild mix of destruction and eventually restoration.
And right away, he's shown two visions that basically set the tone for his entire life. First, an almond branch, which blooms super early, symbolizing that God's judgment was gonna come and it was gonna come fast. And then, a boiling pot, tipping over from the north. A terrifying image of the Babylonian invasion that would just pour down and destroy everything. His mission was crystal clear, and honestly, it was horrifying.
So, yeah, a mission like that doesn't exactly win you a lot of friends. Jeremiah was commanded to speak a truth that absolutely nobody wanted to hear, and he would end up paying an incredible price for his obedience.
His suffering wasn't just a single bad day. It was this slow, escalating nightmare. It started with insults in the street, but that spiraled into plots against his life from his own family, public shouting matches, and eventually, brutal physical violence and being thrown in jail by the authorities.
And the thing is, his message was so powerful because it wasn't just some vague warning. He was pointing out the specific spiritual corruption of the people, using these incredible metaphors like this one to show them just how empty their rituals had become.
So, how did people react? Well, it was immediate and it was hostile. He wasn't just ignored, he was actively hated. Out in the public squares, he became a target for ridicule and actual physical attacks. They called him a madman, a prophet of doom, anything to discredit the terrifying message he was bringing.
But maybe the most painful rejection of all came from home. The men of his own town, we're talking his neighbors, his childhood friends, maybe even his own relatives, they secretly plotted to murder him. They decided it was just better to kill the messenger than to actually listen to the message. Eventually, the religious establishment itself turned on him. He was publicly beaten by a high-ranking priest and then locked in stocks, that wooden device that holds your head in arms, leaving you completely exposed for everyone to mock. It was a punishment designed to completely break him, physically and spiritually. And just when it seemed like things couldn't possibly get any worse, they did. That boiling pot he saw in his vision, it finally tipped over. But it was right here, in the rubble of his entire world, that the secret promise started to come to light.
The Babylonian army crashed through the city walls. Jerusalem was sacked, the Holy Temple was burnt to the ground, and the people were either killed or dragged off into exile. Every single thing Jeremiah had warned them about for decades came true in the most horrific way you can imagine.
Now, in the middle of this absolute chaos, while he's in prison, by the way, God gives him this bizarre instruction. Go buy a plot of land. It made zero sense. That's like buying stock in a company that just went bankrupt.
But it was this profound act of faith, a sign that even in all this devastation, God was promising that there would be a future for this land. And this is it. This is the secret he was holding on to. Right there in the darkness, God reveals the ultimate purpose behind all the destruction. See, it wasn't just about punishment. It was about clearing the ground for something entirely new, a new covenant.
So what on earth is this new covenant? Well, this was the game changer. This was the answer to why Israel had failed over and over and over again, and it was the source of hope that Jeremiah could finally offer from inside the ruins.
See, the new covenant wasn't just like an updated rulebook. It was a promise of a fundamental transformation. God was planning to change the very nature of his relationship with people, moving it from something external that you follow to something deeply internal that you are.
Think about the shift here. The old law, it was written on stone tablets, it's external, it's imposing, and as history clearly showed, it was constantly being broken. This new promise was that the law would be written directly on people's hearts. It would become a part of who they are, not just a list of rules they try to follow.
And what this meant in practice was, well, it was radical. It promised a direct, personal knowledge of God for everyone, not just for priests or prophets. It promised total and complete forgiveness of sins and a desire to obey that actually came from within. This was God's solution to human failure. He would change their hearts from the inside out.
This all leads to probably one of the most famous verses associated with Jeremiah, and it was written to the exiles in Babylon, the very people who had just lost everything. It perfectly captures that secret Jeremiah carried, that even in the most devastating judgment, God's ultimate plan wasn't for harm, but for restoration and for hope.
And that kind of leaves us with this thought, doesn't it? Jeremiah's story suggests that sometimes the most painful things we go through are not the end of the story. Maybe they're the necessary, difficult process of clearing the ground so that something new and something truly unbreakable can be built.